Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and tonight I'm joined by Zack McAtee. And in our episode of Mythic Gaming, he will take us further along the path of Lord of Five Rings, and we will learn all about the Crane clan. Greetings, Zack. How are you?
Doing good yourself?
Doing fantastic and eager to learn about the Crane clan.
Perfect, because they're my favorite.
Well,
So I prepared a little extra with them because I thought there was some interesting bits that you would appreciate from a mythology standpoint. Um, so I mentioned before at the start that each of the seven great clans can roughly be correlated to a standard D&D type class.
mm-hmm.
The Crane clan would be the closest to what you would call a bard. This is because they are preeminently the courtiers, the politicians, and the artisans of the empire. Each clan always has some people who do these things, just like each clan always has someone who does magic. They always have at least one military branch. But the Crane clan focus more on these things than military might or anything of that nature. Um, so as you would expect, their symbol is a crane. It is a very light pale blue, occasionally with silver, and it's a crane enclosed in a circle, which was the signature animal of the kami, one of the gods who fell, who ended up founding the Crane clan. So whereas last time we talked about Lord Hida, who founded the crab, and he was a man of very big deeds, a very strong physical person, Lady Doji was much more focused on the intellectual. So she traveled the country, and at the time when Kami fell, there were multiple tribes living in Rokugan, but they were not interconnected as a society. They had some common language between them, some of them didn't, but they were mostly ships passing in the night. They occupied the same space, but they didn't occupy the same psyche, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So when she toured the lands, the things that she saw and were needed were social structures. So it was Lady Doji who began building what would be recognized as modern Rokugan society. She created the written languages used in Rokugan. She created the caste system, which that's a bag because it's kind of bad, but also kind of good. It's fantasy, but it's like, oh yeah, peasants don't count as people kind of thing. It's like, not one of her finer moments, I'd say. Um, but she created the tea ceremony as a means to kind of even the caste system. So when someone is engaging in it, even if it's, say, a lord and a peasant, they are considered equals during the process of the tea ceremony. And then she also pioneered a lot of the artisan techniques that are used throughout the country. So originally, the kami, as we talked about before, had a tournament to see who would get to rule the country. She beat one of her siblings, who went on to found the Phoenix clan, but then lost to her sibling who founded the Lion clan. You will notice that this becomes a recurring theme. The crane and the lion are constantly at odds. They do not like each other. And it all stems from that original tournament, and it's just gone all the way down the bloodlines until like modern times. Um, so after setting up her clan, after the tournament had resolved, she became the imperial advisor directly to Hante, the first emperor. And so she became known as the left hand of the emperor. The founder of the lion, Akodo, he was much more militarily focused, and he became known as the right hand of the emperor. So he had his strong right hand and then his left hand, which could offer diplomacy. So when Fu Leng came and demanded that he should rule the country, since he didn't get to compete in the tournament, she was one of the only ones who was hesitant to actually try and fight him. Not because she didn't think they could beat him, but because she still remembered her younger brother. And she wanted there to be something to say of him. And she did not know that he was so far gone that that was not a possibility. And so she was the most hesitant to attack him for some time, but did go along with everyone's plans to try and end his evil before it could wipe out the entire civilization that they had built. So after defeating Fu Leng, the Unicorn, which is the only other clan that the founding kami is female, Shinjo was very, very close with Doji, as they were the only sisters among like 7 siblings. And so eventually Shinjo had visions that she needed to leave the country to try and find out what other threats to the empire were in the greater world. Doji did not want her to go and really regretted it, and she didn't want to stop her, but she didn't want her to go. So what she did is she handmade a fan with her personal seal on it and gave it to her sister for luck during her travels. And that will reoccur when we talk about the Unicorn Clan, because it's actually a very pivotal item for how they returned to the Empire. After Shinjo left, one by one, her siblings either died, vanished, or moved on to other planes. Eventually, the only ones left in Rokugan were her and Lord Hida, who we talked about last week. She grew weary of her demigod immortality, of her long life. She had seen her husband die. She had seen several of her children die. And so at this point, with the only sibling being one that she didn't really have a good relationship with, she decided it was time for her to move on. So she used her magics to create Sasagyu, which is an armor manifested from the honor and nobility of her great-grandson, which became the ancestral armor of the crane that has been passed down the line since then. She gifted it to her great-grandson. She withdrew pretty much entirely. And then the last time she was seen, she was at a beach by the Doji Castle. She was standing on a rocky outcropping to watch the sunset. And when the waves washed over the spot where she was standing, they receded and she was nowhere to be found. Ever since, it has now become a holy site pilgrimage for the crane. Specifically, anyone who is chosen to be the Crane Clan champion spends a night vigil outside of the rock, kind of offering tribute to Lady Doji for founding the clan and everything that she brought them. And there are various theories as to what she did or what happened to her. Some people think that she became one with the ocean, that she is still there in some way. Other people think she returned up to the heavens. Others insist that perhaps Fu Leng had done something and had killed her or taken her away. It's one of those things that there's like no end of theories and no real concrete answers as to what happened, which is a recurring theme in a lot of folklore, as I'm sure you're aware, because it leaves things open-ended for the story to continue in some other way in the future. So I figure what we'll do is between the segments, do you have any questions about Lady Doji and the founding of the Crane Clan?
I have some general questions that have been asked before, but I'll ask them again for those who are new. So this is a very rich and complex world that's very multi-layered. And it's everything from sublime to epic. Now, aside from this role-playing game, what are some of the other gateways into this universe?
Yeah, so L5R has been around since, I believe, the early 80s. So there's a lot of different ways you can get into this fandom and all this history and lore. It started as a trading card game. They have since made a revamped version of the trading card game. They've made a living card game. They've made several board games. They have quite an extensive library of novels, fiction novels, as well as the actual RPG books themselves. They have done some crossover board games. So like there's a board game called Love Letter that's a very quick, fun little game, and they did a cross branding with Legend of the Five Rings at one point. And then most recently, they have this 5th edition of the RPG. They made a companion piece called Adventures in Rokugan, which is an adaptation of the system to be used with the D&D 5e engine. And then they have, I think, 2 video games coming out for the first time ever. I think one of them comes out this year, and the other one is, I think they haven't set a date yet, but they recently revealed a trailer, I think, at the last big games convention they were at for it. So they've been trying to update with the times and keep things accessible. The website, the core website, is actually a nice place to visit because for a while they were doing almost a retrospective, and they were kind of saying, hey, like, here are stories of tournaments and things back when players had influence on the story elements to kind of give you an idea of why this game was so resonant with people. And so they had a series of articles explaining big pivotal moments in the story that were influenced by the player choices in the tournaments. They actually managed to redo that recently. They had a board game come out this year, and pirates are attacking like the main trading river. There are 4 clans that have big stakes in the area, and so they were putting little bits of fiction of each of the clan heads, like learning about the pirate, and then they had the fans vote for which one would catch it. And then that has become the official lore, which is now going to be printed in the novels that are coming out this year and next year. So it was nice to see them kind of harken back to that. But there's a myriad amount of ways to get into it.
Is there any LARPing? I know you're into LARPing, and LARPing is very popular. And I can, from what my visualizations are and the times you've been describing this, this seems like a very rich culture to LARP in as well.
So I don't know if it's still going, but I think it was around the 3rd edition of the RPG. They put out a kind of companion system to adapt it for LARPing. I only found out about that because the local game store that we go to for like board game nights, they have like a like half off shelf and kind of thing, and they have like 20 copies of the core book for the L5R LARPing. And like every time I go to the store, I'm like, maybe I'll just grab that and read through it and see like, you know, if it's got anything interesting to delve from, because it's only like, I don't know, $15, whatever. But it was popular enough that when I looked into it, they did release multiple books for it. So it wasn't just a core book. They ended up adding splat books for like different types of characters, different types of magic. Like I said, I'm not sure if it's still got a scene today.
You should bring it back if it doesn't.
I could really see it being like, because L5R, and I was just talking about this with one of my players this morning. They put a strong focus on the idea that social skills can be just as, if not more important than martial skills. And that's a difficult thing to balance in a lot of games. And a lot of systems don't really give it as much love as they need to. But a big focus of L5R is the politics, is the course, the I'm saying something to this person without this person understanding. I'm making an alliance over here so that I can defend over there. Like, it's very much focused on that aspect. And so I could totally see like, oh, you get like a nice big Airbnb or something, give everybody like, you're from this clan, you're from this clan, here are your kind of like goals, and like have like a winter court as they call them. Like that could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've been DMing since the hobby originated, and since those early years, no encounter that anyone's encountered in any of my games, regardless of what the setting is, could not be resolved by talking. And the players know that. So whereas in the beginning, when they get involved in a role-playing game, it's like hitting things and then taking their stuff.
Yep.
That's the enjoyment. After a while, they see that it's a lot more interesting if they figure out ways of negotiating with or tricking
Yeah.
the entities that they encounter, be they monsters or people. So the complexity of the system that you've been talking about, I can see that that lends itself to very many shades of interaction that you wouldn't get in a more a fantasy standard role-playing game or gaming system.
And that's why the player I was talking with this morning was like talking about how they're spending XP because they just ended an arc, and was saying, you know, like, oh yeah, like I know like the power gamer in me wants to just say, oh, let me just increase my core stats, let me do X, Y, and Z. But he said, you know, I've been kind of thinking about it in a reactionary way. So based off of the things we've dealt with and things my character has encountered, the areas where she doesn't feel she's strong enough, he's like, I want to put a lot more points into things like that. So he's putting some points into like art skills, into scholar skills, trying to kind of broaden her research as she's traveling the Empire. And like he said, he's like, I know I'm still going to be useless in combat, you know, but I think, you know, he's like, it kind of balances out, you know, like we've got the big meathead in the group. He can just do the combat stuff. And then when we need to talk to people, I'll do that, and he just shuts up, you know.
So that'll make a lot of for a lot of interesting stories.
Yeah, and it's you get a lot of compelling where you can turn it on their heads. So like during the first arc, which was like a murder mystery esque thing, the meathead, the big crab like paladin who does not do social stuff, was forced to do a lot of social stuff to get to the bottom of the investigation of who was being impersonated at the wedding, who was the killer, and it was taking the character outside their element right from the get go. So like he has started to put points into sentiment is their skill for essentially insight, being able to tell like how does someone feel, are they being truthful, do they have an ulterior motive, and so he's put points into that specifically because his character had to do those things in the first arc.
When I ran games that were set in very complex worlds, like for instance, the Hyborian Age of Robert E. Howard, or the Thieves World world that had a lot of literature, a lot of games, a lot of RPG ways of experiencing them, and there were rich worlds already in place. First, there's deciding what's canon to your world that you're running.
Yep.
And then at what point in time is your game taking in? Like, is Conan a thief? Is he a pirate? Is he a general? Is he a king? Is he an old man? And then setting the stories there and then building from there. I could see this setting being much the same thing, that this is set in this place during this time, and these things happened in our game, and the rest of it's rumors, or
Yeah,
might have happened, but maybe they didn't,
I did that with this one, and one of my players, after we started playing this, started listening to podcasts of other people, like when they stream them playing it, and then he messaged me. He's like, "I didn't know that that one character from the wedding was an official character because he just showed up in these other people's games." And I was like, yeah. I was like, he I pulled from the lore, like he, from this gear, this is how he was and where he was at, and that kind of thing. And so he was kind of like floored at realizing that he was interacting with things that he didn't realize like were official lore. Um, so as you know, whenever you have that world building kit, it's really fun to just pick and choose and put it all together. Like
Yeah, it is another world that I enjoyed adventuring for many years, was the Forgotten Realms in the D&D universe, especially the northern parts of it, like with Icewind Dale and
yeah,
the World and Luskan and all those places. That made for very immersive role playing. And again, I like blending these type of portals, so people can go wander off and have a board game set in the town if they wanted to do that.
yeah,
And the other people would be doing something together. And this way there was always choice. And after a while too, people would get so knowledgeable about the universe and the game that they would do like spin-offs. And then there were
yep.
official spin-offs and unofficial spin-offs. And it eventually got very cluttered, like a comic book universe, and you needed to do that crisis, to kind of
Yeah, unite them. Yeah.
unite them or bring them apart and uncanonize some things, canonize certain other things. So how many years have you been adventuring in this setting?
In L5R, I am just coming up on my 1 year anniversary.
Really?
I,
So
yeah, so
wow.
for the past year, I have almost read nothing but either L5R core books or L5R novels. So I've been joking, like I have this huge like samurai stack of just everything. And it got to the point where I think I finished the last book in July, and then I was sitting there, I was like, I don't know what to read now. Like it's been nothing but samurai adventures for the past 10 months. Where do I go from here? Um,
The,
but yeah, I've been spending a lot of time reading it.
the original folklore and mythology upon which it is based. That's always a good.
Yeah.
That's what I usually do. I'll go there and see what inspirations they drew from the source material, and sometimes that opens up new ways of looking at things or experiencing things. And that setting is very rich in mythology. And you pointed out at other times how they've integrated certain myths from other cultures and made them, integrated them seamlessly. Where if you know the origin of the myth, it comes from far away from the setting, but still they made it part of the setting, and that I enjoyed a great deal.
And that's a good segue, because the part that I thought you would enjoy the most with the Crane Clan is Kakita is kind of like the folk hero in L5R, at least in the early days of the lore. And so Kakita eventually became a Crane, obviously, since we're talking about the Crane. But you will recognize some elements, I think, from from Hercules myths and other things like that. So Kakita was a young man from one of the tribes that was existing in Rokugan before the kami came to Earth. When he was 15, he hunted down and killed a troll that had been harassing the nearby lands. He was witnessed by an old man who introduced himself only as grandfather. He then took Kakita as his apprentice to teach him all the things he knew of fighting. Eventually, when he had learned everything that he could, grandfather sent Kakita into the mountains to seek out a blacksmith named grandmother. She then took Kakita as her apprentice to teach him everything that she knew about smithing. And it was at this point in Rokugan where history was changed. Kakita was tired of the curved swords that had existed amongst his tribes and crafted something new. He crafted a straighter edge sword, which he then named the katana. So he founded this sword that became an integral part of the samurai soul for the entire rest of the history of Rokugan. So when he was finished, he found out, big surprise, both of his teachers, who refused to give him actual names, turned out to be the same person, who wasn't a person, but was one of the shape-shifting Tengu we talked about briefly last podcast. And so at that point, he had learned everything he could from them, and he was 19. Emperor Hante decided he wanted to hold a tournament to find what he would call the Emerald Champion, a singular warrior from amongst Rokugan who would act as his personal bodyguard and personal sword in any matters that he needed it for. Kakita said, yeah, okay. He's like, I spent the past 4 years trading in the mountains for this. This is exactly what I can do. So he traveled to the Imperial City and quickly won every match that he came into up until the finals. Every time that he beat an opponent, he took the time, he bowed to them, he would speak with them and talk about, with respect, how well they fought, the techniques they used. He was extremely courteous, which is the core tenet of the Crane Clan in modern times. And so, in counterpoint, I mentioned the lion would come back, and they did. So the final two in the tournament were Kakita, who would become the Crane Clan, and Matsu, who was already in the Lion Clan. Whereas Kakita was respectful and kind to all of his opponents, Matsu instead mocked them every time she beat them. Publicly, she would just deride them in the middle of the arena in front of everyone about how terrible they were, how their techniques were worthless, up and down, all these nasty, nasty things. And Kakita took notice of this. When they finally came to fight, he very quickly dealt with her. He didn't say anything. He just turned and walked away without bowing, which, given how much respect he had paid to every opponent to that point, Matsu took this as a grievous insult. She wanted to immediately fight him again right then and there, but was unable, and so instead swore a blood vendetta that has lasted into the modern times between their two families. And that will come up again in both the Crane segment and when we talk about the Lion as well. So after he was appointed as the Emerald Champion, he became the leader of what they call the Emerald Magistrates. A magistrate is, in this setting, kind of a traveling judge, I suppose is a good way to put it. They have the power to deputize people to assist them. They kind of just roam the empire unless they're called specific places to investigate, like, oh, there's a murder that happened, or this deed is missing, etc. And they act to try and keep the country unified under their one set of laws. That way, no like remote village just kind of does their own thing and ignores all the imperial decrees. So after serving as the Emerald Champion for a bit, Emperor Hante introduced Kikita to Lady Doji, and he mentioned that he hoped that the two would marry. Doji was reluctant, is a good way to put it. She didn't really want to tie herself to a mortal. What could a mortal be of worth compared to someone who lived in the heavens? So she said, okay, I will marry Kikita if he can pass 3 trials of my design. So Hante and Kikita were both nervous when they heard this, because if a god is going to give you trials, they're probably not going to be easy. But they agreed. So she gave her 3 commandments. She said, you need to bring the dead back to life. You need to measure the width of the world, and you must show me a vision of absolute beauty. So Kikita took some time to think about these. He requested a bit of leave from the emperor to travel the empire and seek wisdom, get other people's opinions, try and see what he could find. And eventually, and it doesn't say how long, I think it was at least a year that he was traveling, he does return to the imperial city. And so he comes to Lady Doji and says, I have found the way to complete your 3 trials. So the first trial, bring the dead back to life. He had brought with him a piece of dead driftwood, and he sat there and gently carved it into a stringed instrument and then played a song upon it, thus bringing the dead back to life in a metaphorical manner. She admitted that he passed. This met the test. So then it was on to measuring the width of the world. So he stated to her that the width of the world could not be measured in distance. It could only be measured by the company you had while crossing it. And if that were true, if your companion was Lady Amaterasu, who is the sun, technically you could cross the world in 1 day. Again, she had to admit, okay, you've found an answer for this that I didn't quite expect. And she was beginning to see the merit in Kikita. And then finally, it was to show her a vision of absolute. So Kikita reached into his bag and he pulled out the most polished, exquisite mirror that had ever been made and held it up to her face. And she was narcissistic enough that that worked. So then she immediately accepted the marriage. They were married the same day after that completing of the trials. And then they had many children thereafter. He served as the Emerald Champion for 2 decades. And then the last things of big note with him are towards the end of his life. So shortly before retiring, Hante wanted to see which of the 2 main sword fighting styles in the country was the best. So there was the Aijutsu style that Kikita himself founded. And then there was the, I believe it's Nijutsu, is the Dragon Clan founded a 2-sword style of combat. And so Mirumoto was the family closely associated with that in the Dragon Clan. They had a very, very famous duelist who was the son of the founder of that family. So Hante invited him and Kikita to duel in front of him so he could see which one of these is better. The 2 duelists met on the prearranged field in front of the emperor and his various sundry, and they stood completely still for an entire day. Neither of them moved, neither of them blinked, neither of them touched their weapons. Finally, they both bowed to each other and walked away from the field. When asked afterwards, both said, if either of us had drawn steel, both of us would have died. After that moment, the 2 had great respect for each other and their respective sword styles. They corresponded via letter and read each other's philosophies and texts on the different fighting styles. And both of them kind of felt that lack of not getting the satisfaction of knowing. So, years later, Rokugan is a period, a place of permanent minor wars. And oh no, now the crane and the dragon are having a minor war. Oh man, wouldn't it be a great opportunity to try and rehab that duel that we both decided not to have when we were young? So Kikita and Mirumoto both met on the field of battle. It was Kikita's 39th birthday. They Both agreed that this time they would fight to the best of their abilities, that this would be the final test. The battle was said to be incredible, and it eventually ended when Kakita did cut down Mirumoto. But before the dragon had died, he dealt Kakita a mortal wound. So rather than trying to seek medical aid to try and prolong his life after this fight, Kakita instead called his son, who was his second, and said, "Bring me Mirumoto's sword." His son brought it to him, and Kakita held up the sword close to his mouth and whispered to it, "Do your duty to your master," and then threw himself upon it and died. After the duel, a shrine was built in honor of both of the combatants, and ever since, at least once a generation, students from the two different schools come there to test their strengths against each other. And that is Kakita, the folk hero.
Oh, that is great. And every culture, as you pointed out, has one, and they're similarly tested by trials. Even though they have divine qualities, they're very mortal in a sense as well, and they get immortalized in one way or another way when their life is done. So they join the heavens,
Yep.
literally and some figuratively.
And then there's the recurring theme of the strange mentor who's more than they
Yes.
appear. Like it's fun to see how they weave a lot of that together, and that's he's one of the more fascinating ones to me, just because of all the, again, like the traveling adventures of like, oh, he's got to pass these tests, he's got to do this, like.
Now, when I was growing up, the kung fu films and the samurai films and the ninja films, they were a very big thing. And one of the themes that I noticed recurred in a lot of the movies was that the individual is more powerful than the surrounding culture. And the surrounding culture is usually very repressive and controlling and, highly structured and stylized. So the hero is often an outsider. And that's repeated in other cultures too. Like Hercules, the Greeks prided themselves on being civilized, and Hercules was a barbarian, basically.
Yeah.
So he too, he was part of the culture, but didn't fit in the culture. And in some ways, he transcended, and he was able to change the culture.
Yeah.
So is that an important part of the experience of playing in the setting?
I think it can be. If the DM worked with you well, it's all about having your actions be remembered. And so the way the game achieves this is you have two social stats called honor and glory. Honor is your character's own attestment to their behavior. It is how they think they uphold the tenets of Bushido. Glory is how other people see them. And so you have this tightrope balance where you can take actions that will either gain or lose you either of those. Some actions may require you to stake them, to bet them effectively. So if you're challenged to, say, defeat an enemy that no one else has managed to do so publicly in front of people, if you don't accept, you're going to be losing face. And that will be remembered, and people in the Empire will talk about that. So then 3 arcs down the line, if someone meets you and they're like, wait a minute, I think I heard a tale of, wasn't there a scorpion who they were challenged to go and fight 3 goblins and they chose to chicken out? Like you have that kind of built-in rumor system. It gets to the point where if your honor gets high or low enough, you actually gain specific, they're called advantages and disadvantages, but think of them as feats that are known as either fame or infamy. So if you become really low in honor, you can become infamous for your disdain for one of the tenets of Bushido. So if you're someone who doesn't care about courtesy, you'll just interrupt the guy challenging you by stabbing him and just skipping the whole duel. You're just this totally ill-mannered person. You'll become infamous for that. So people, upon meeting you, will have heard rumors of you to that effect. And like they list like specific instances where, oh, if you're ever in a situation where your reputation for X, Y, or Z would be relevant, you are forced to re-roll 2 success dice after making a roll. That's a disadvantage. Advantage works the opposite, where you could re-roll 2 dice. So if you're famous for being courageous and you're making that claim, like, no, I'll go hunt and take down the ogre myself, and people know that you're courageous because you have that famous quality, and you failed the roll to inspire people, you could re-roll 2 of those dice because you have advantage for that situation.
In Scandinavian lore, in the Eddas, in the Havamal, there's a passage, cattle die, kinsmen die, you yourself must likewise die, but word fame never dies for him who attains it well.
That's the one of the Crane Clan families. Their motto is "The coward never lives and the hero never dies."
Very
Very,
exciting.
yeah.
Now, I can see you're very enthused and knowledgeable and indeed passionate about this particular setting. So, how can we indulge your passion and evolve your giving information? Because after a few more times, you'll have given all the basic information. How can we go past that? Would you like to interview people who are in the hobby, like creators of games, writers of books?
I know some of them do respond fairly well to online communication. The Discord for the official Discord for the game, and some of the authors of the novels post there, which is really cool because it's one of the novels is what recently got me into it back a year ago. And I think like a couple months after I was reading those novels, the author was posting about now the third one in their series. And I told them, I was like, oh yeah, your book is actually what got me into this and everything. And they were responding like, um, but I'm sure there's various ways we could even I don't know if other DMs do it this way, but I usually write session notes for my games, and I kind of write them as like short story. Like I don't usually include like dialogue because I'm not going to remember exactly what people said, but like
Right.
I write it out as a chronological story of here's what happened during the session. Um, so if that was something that was of interest, I could even start reading those at some point. Um,
Okay.
I'm sure that there's various things we could do.
You could interview your players.
Yeah,
You could put in interview requests for the game designers and the book authors. You said that there's a culture that one can enter in very many different ways. You can focus on these different cultures. You could do it in costume if you want.
that's. I don't think I have the wherewithal to get a good enough put together costume. At least not the way I would ever envision it. You know, like
Okay, then long term we could aim toward that. But yeah, let's have fun with this. And again, you're very knowledgeable about it. You're very passionate about it, and you're very eloquent
thank
about
you.
it. So let's do something with that. Let's have a podcast adventure with the Five Rings. So what clan would you belong to?
It's a tough one because the crane are my favorite, but I also see a lot of the scorpion in myself. The scorpion, when we'll get to them, we'll do more in depth, but they are kind of the dark side opposite of the crane, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
The crane are the main political movers. They are the ones who enforce courtesy. They try to get everyone to act civil. They care very much about appearances. The scorpion, their main belief is we are here to do the things the others in the empire can't. So they don't care as much about honor because they're trying to protect the empire. And whereas maybe a crane or a lion might balk at doing some things that are illegal, immoral, even if they're for the greater good, the scorpion will do them. And that's they're the nice counterpoint. And so there's lots of lore of the two of them like undermining each other in court, back and forth. Um, the scorpion have a lot of ninja, a lot of assassins. The crane have what they call harriers, which are effectively military saboteur ninjas. So they don't do anything against civilians. They don't go and perform assassinations or poisonings. All they do is try to sabotage military efforts. So they might say, go and redirect supply lines so that when the enemy shows up to the fight, they haven't had food in a few days, so they're all fatigued and weary. Or they might go and like weaken the supports on a bridge so that when the other army goes to cross it, the bridge collapses, slows them down, and injures some of their people. And both of those are like very hush hush activities, but it's interesting to see that even in that, the Crane have that line they like won't cross. That bit of, I cannot give up my personal honor for this. The Scorpion will give up their personal honor. So, and they're very pragmatic. And I'm not sure on which side of that fence I fall more on. I feel like it shifts day to day.
You've said in the past, when you talked about the clans, that they learn from each other and they help each other out. So sometimes there's a blending.
Yeah.
Are there like dual classes or triple classed characters who kind of combine several different clans into their modus operandi?
So what you have in the fifth edition, which is the one that I run and play, you don't have to take a school, which is their equivalent of a class, that's from your clan. So you could say, okay, maybe I want to play as someone who was born a Crane, but for one reason or another, they were raised as sort of a political prisoner by the Crown. And so, despite the fact that you are a Crane and you come from that heritage, which you would gain certain stats from, you can join a school from a different clan, and then you'll continue to gain different stats from that one. So, in this case, you could have someone who has maybe a background in some form of artisan work. Maybe they were someone who they made clothing, or they were a poet, and then they got sent over to be this political prisoner and have now been forced into becoming like a defender, like a stalwart person who stands on the wall. You can't take two schools, you can't swap schools, but there are some options to kind of make your own. Like you can work with your DM and say, okay, like here's the character concept. You know, is there something we could do? Maybe where like I trained with this clan for a bit, and then maybe train with this one, and so you can kind of take little bits from the different schools to put together.
Okay, so you can be creative and
Yeah, it's a what's the term? It's a your mileage may vary kind of thing, because they're like, yeah, you can do it. They don't give you too much on how to do it, so it's gonna fly by the seat of your pants, you know.
are there celestial level games?
I wouldn't be surprised, and that's I feel like this is gonna be a very off departure. Have you read Watership Down?
Many years ago when it was first written, Peter Benchley, right?
I think so.
He wrote a book on cave bears too, I think, Shardik or Shattuck or something like that.
That sounds right. The title sounds right. So the thing that I really liked about Watership Down is, for a book that's it's just about rabbits that can talk, you know, it doesn't sound like it's going to have much in it that's not kind of more than easy light reading. They do a very good job of addressing the topic that actions one may take may later become myth and folklore for later
Yes.
generations.
Hmm.
And so I can absolutely see someone running a game of L5R that either deals with these archetypal characters and say, oh, there was the legend of, you know, this ancient dragon who did X, Y, or Z, and you know, now we're getting to see what that actually was, and like it's been exaggerated or changed over the years. Here's the root of it. They do have there's a book in the newest edition called Celestial Realms that is specifically about the different planes. Um, so it's kind of like Yggdrasil, but it's not like physically together like Yggdrasil, but there's these different planes. So they say that the one humans are on is like the center, and then the ones above us are the things associated with heaven, the ones below us are the ones associated with hell, and then there's ones to the side, like the realm of dreams, or the realm of tricksters, the realm of animal spirits. And
That's how shamanism works. Shamanism has a three-level tree or pillar or something similar system uh,
yeah,
that ties the worlds together. And in the Greek model, they kind of all blend together. They're not really separate places joined by portals or things like that. They kind of all blend into each other and become one place. But there's still the three levels. There's the underworld. There's the earth dwelling realm, and then there's the sky realm or the celestial realm.
And it's a big thing in the L5R mythos is especially the ones that they consider to the side of the mortal realm. The overlap is completely random, and so there's all these tales of like a child was playing in the woods and a fox started playing with the ball, so they follow the fox like through a tree that was bent over and they disappear into the realm of animal
Yes.
spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's that almost that like changeling-esque, that fey aspect.
Yeah.
That's how like those realms overlap. In dreams, you can accidentally find yourself in other people's dreams. They have a lot of lore written about how the world of dreams is almost a release for a lot of the citizens of the Empire because, as you mentioned, it's very restrictive. You're not supposed to be emotional, especially in public. You are always supposed to be making the exact right choice and have no qualms about it. Whereas in dreams, you can be whatever you want. So if you are someone who, if we go back to that crane who's a poet and sent to the crab, they don't enjoy that life. They don't want to be part of it. In their dreams, they can be someone who doesn't fight. They can be someone who writes and reads, and that's how they interact with people. And that's okay because it's in a different realm. The problem is if you then start doing that in real life is when society starts like ratcheting the screws on you.
And that's how it is in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Very many ways. My chihuahua is climbing on me.
That's I'm surprised my cats have not come up yet. I was fully expecting one of them to just walk right across the desk.
Yeah, there she is.
Hmm.
That's why I was moving around because she wanted to jump, but there wasn't enough room for her to jump.
Yep.
Well, I'm very impressed by the setting. I'm in my late 60s now, so I doubt if I'll ever immerse myself in it. It seems too vast for me to explore, but I love learning about it, and I'd love to learn more about the world through a podcast. So give it some thought. Let's do something creative and unique and original, and let's run with it.
Yeah. And that's I appreciate you letting me talk about something that I am passionate about and that I enjoy. It's nice, you know. It's I always I like that aspect of sharing. Like I like when you find a hobby you like so much that you have fun showing it to other people. I think that that's always a good thing. Like finding
Mhm.
something that you love to that level.
I'm finding lately that I've returned to reading Sword and Sorcery, which I hadn't done in a very long time. But that was a very big part of my reality for big chunks of my life. In fact, I had a television show called Thor the Barbarian, where I used to dress in leather and had a sword, and I used to wander around New York City, and I had minstrels with mini DV cams, and we used to chronicle the adventures. I'm finding that I really enjoyed it, and I shouldn't have stopped reading it. I feel now, you know.
It's yeah, and it's L5R was actually the first system I tried to learn to run. Back when I was, I think 16, 17, I found the fourth edition core book at a yard sale. And at that point, I had started to play D&D with my friends and my cousins. Like I had never run anything, and so I was trying to learn, but like it was too difficult to get into at that point. I didn't have the head for it, you know, and like I was like, oh, okay, you know, that was cool, whatever, and I kind of forgot about it entirely until then when I was looking for books to take on an airplane flight last year, and I saw the ones by Marie Brennan, who is the author of the trilogy that got me back into it. And I was like, oh, you know what? I think wasn't this that one that I tried to read that book on long ago? You know, I haven't read anything like with samurai ninja stuff in a long time. Whatever, you know, maybe let me give it a go. And then just like with you, like I picked it up and it immediately was like, like immediately immersed. I get it now.
Uh-huh.
I'm in it. You know, so it's nice when things come back around like that.
Yes, it is. And I'm finding that initially it was uncomfortable to readjust myself to the sword and sorcery world. But now that I'm several books into it, I look forward to the books. I started buying the comics again. Again, what do you call it? I'd be content with that for the remaining 30 years or so, whatever I have left. I think there's enough material there for me to enjoy it.
Yeah, and then even today, like that's still a genre that's getting love. Like if you're doing comics, I don't know if you've picked it up, but I would recommend, I think it's called The Last God. It was a 10 or 12 issue miniseries set in a sword and sandal like fantasy, like very big Conan bucks.
Uh,
Relatively low magic. Most magic is attributed to like the enemies that humans have to deal with as opposed to humans. Um, and like without getting too spoilery, it starts with the legend of this group of people from different cultures that take down this evil god. And now it's like 20 something years later, they're all like monarchs and ambassadors and, you know, big established people. Uh, and it turns out that they didn't, that they actually just made a deal that he would go away for a few decades. And so now, like, all of their lies start coming undone, and people have to make a new group to try and stop him. Um, Really, really fun. They do a good job of building the mythos. Highly recommend.
what is it called again?
I believe it's called The Last God. I'll double check for you and
The
I'll send
Last
you a
God.
link.
Okay. Yeah,
But they,
I read something called The Mighty Barbarians, and I guess this person took mythical figures, and he also took sword and sorcery barbarians, so I guess we're in the public domain now.
okay.
Morgan Le Fay got them all together to stop this peril that was invading all their worlds. And so it's good to see Thongor and Kull in the same place with Anansi and Nanook and a Viking shield maiden and Morgan Le Fay. And Merlin came and he turned out to be a corrupt figure and, had all these twists and turns. And it ended with Loki uh,
Okay.
sitting on a throne. So we know there's going to be more
Yep.
hijinks coming later on. I had a lot of fun with it. It was very enjoyable.
As I like that now that we're getting a lot of that public domain stuff, people are having that free reign. Like
Hmm.
I read, I think a year and a half, 2 years ago, it was a crossover book where Sherlock Holmes became involved with the demons from Hellraiser.
Oh wow!
And so he found the puzzle box and all this stuff, and it was really interesting, you know, like because he's got that like obsessive personality, especially with things he can't figure out. So he's like, I think at one point he's in a room trying to solve the Hellraiser cube, the lament configuration for like a month without bathing and all this stuff. And like Watson finds him and he's like, "Oh my god, like what have you been doing?" Like, but I really like that we're getting to see these kind of new takes and like meshings of pre-established characters.
And a lot of characters are going to public domain in the very near future, so that it'll be very interesting, especially superheroic characters that have become household names. And it'll be interesting to see what happens when they can no longer be protected by their
Yeah,
owners.
and it's I'm always a fan of taking something old and looking at it a new way.
Right.
And so I always love DC calls them Elseworlds stories.
Yes.
Love that kind of stuff. And they just started what they're calling the Absolute line, and so it's like a different Earth where like the whole history of the Earth is much worse than standard Prime Earth. And so, for example, the Batman in this universe was not born to wealth. He doesn't have all that money and power. They haven't really gotten the Superman and Wonder Woman ones out yet, but Superman was not found and raised by the Kents. Wonder Woman did not have a society. She was just kind of by herself in the wilderness for a long time. And so they're doing these whole different takes on it. And I read the first issue of Absolute Batman. It was pretty fun. I was leery going in, but I was like, okay, I like what they've done so far, and I like what it looks like it might lead to.
Well, you've encouraged me now to look into it. I was kind of avoiding exploring it because there's so many different universes to enter through
Yeah,
books that it becomes very pricey and it starts eating into your time and taking up space. So I've been trying to minimize the comic books. I got into Power Girl for a while, and I couldn't figure out what am I trying to tell myself through Power Girl. And then it became very clear. Power Girl has been through several shifts in universe,
Yeah.
and her origin changes all the time.
Yep.
Essentially, the character is asking, what is the character? Is the character the story? No, it can't be, because she's still Power Girl, regardless of whether she's from Krypton, Atlantis, or wherever they have her being from. So it brings us some really interesting questions, and I enjoyed that for quite a while. And now I've gone into Sword and Sorcery, so I'm enjoying that. But the comic books are fascinating, and it's sad that they're so perishable,
Yeah.
because I feel that some of the stories should survive the ages and be celebrated thousands of years from now.
And it's there. I think I have it on my phone. So unsurprisingly, I've read a lot of the Thor comic books.
Me too.
And there is a bit where it's a storyteller is talking to some Norse kids who were like misbehaving, and he is telling them these tales of Thor from the past, the future, and all this stuff. And I don't know where it is. But at one point, basically, it comes down to he tells them a story of when Thor was in that period where he was bonded with that construction worker and would like
Yes.
swap places with him and stuff. And so the kids are like, "Oh, like what does did that story even happen? Like it sounded so weird, this, that, and the other thing." And Odin says, like uh, if that story is true, it will not be true until even your grandchildren's grandchildren are long since dead. So the question is not, was the story true, but what the story tells you. Like that idea of the tale is in the telling. It doesn't matter whether or not it's a fantasy. It's not. It has a seed, and can you find it?
And that is the best way to end today's conversation. That is very profound and very true. How can people reach you, and how can they get involved in the games that you DM?
So you can always either find me on Facebook or send me an email at mrmunnin@gmail.com.
Thank you so very much, Zach. I enjoyed today very much. I look forward to next time. And again, give it some thought. Let's send personal messages back and forth, and let's play with this.
That sounds good. Well, thank you as always for having me.
And thank you so much for enriching the show and the minds of our listeners or viewers in the case of today. And this will be posted by midday tomorrow.
Perfect.
Okay, good night.
Yeah, have a good night.
You too.